Welcome to Petros Family Tax. Congratulations, you're on your way to start your own business. You're breaking free from the corporate world and you're looking at starting your own business here. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a number of steps. That's probably not the most fun, but generally necessary for you to scale and achieve some of your goals. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover setting up an LLC, again, tax ID numbers, potential payroll, bookkeeping, and we're just going to kind of get you started off on that journey in order for you to keep growing your business, your brand new business. So the number one thing to remember as we're going through this is the number one way to make money is to sell your services or products. Everything I'm about to show you, these are important, but not as important as bringing in the money. And so we're not going to cover any fancy tax tricks or look at credit card rewards, because the number one thing that's going to drive business and your success is the quality of the services you provide. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at setting up an LLC document. So this is a legal document that's not going to impact your taxes necessarily. There's a difference between how you file your taxes and how your legal formation. If you're just starting out, no revenue or anything, and you don't expect anything substantial off the bat, you can go ahead on, for example, on LegalZoom and create your LLC documents. So let's go ahead and dive in. So here I just pulled up LegalZoom, and typically you go with the basic package, but as you're going through this, they're going to try to add on a bunch of services for you. And so for the most part, I'll show you some of the other things that we'll be doing later where you don't necessarily need to pay for them if you don't want to. It is a little bit more work. If you want to just get it all done, then you can go ahead with the premium option. But you can typically go ahead and create what's called the Articles of Incorporation. That's basically saying, I am the owner of this LLC, and this is the name of the LLC. And what this is going to do is going to file with your state the name of your company and who's in charge of it. So going through those steps, it's also going to search for similar names. So just make sure to have a couple names in mind. You feel free to have your top one and maybe some adjustments to it, and just drive through that LegalZoom. After you've completed your Articles of Incorporation, the next step is to have a tax ID number. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So you generally will need two tax ID numbers. One is for federal and the other one is for state. Now again, we set up the legal documents with LegalZoom. How you're taxed doesn't necessarily correspond with how your LLC is set up. And typically to start off with, it's just going to be what's called a sole proprietor. What that means is you have your LLC, but all that income, all the expenses, everything's going to pass through to your own personal tax return. And so when we set up a tax ID number, that's really just going to be helpful for the steps down the road as far as your business checking account, credit card, and some other key things there. But it's not really going to impact your tax situation. So you can just go on your website, just Google get a tax ID number, or EIN. So what you do is you just go ahead and click on apply for an EIN, fill in your information, and then by the end of it, you're going to get about a 2-page document called an SS4, and that's just going to say here's the name of the company and here's the tax identification number of your LLC. Once you have that, then you should go to your state's Secretary of State's website. And so here in Minnesota, you can see this one is through the Department of Revenue, and you just create a business tax registration and apply for a tax ID number and just follow the steps. You'll need is your business name, your address, which we already completed with LegalZoom. You also need your federal tax ID number, which we just did through the IRS. And then the last thing is this NAIC code. Basically every business, whether you're a realtor, an IT consultant, landscaping company, there's a code that the government uses to kind of classify and kind of track information for the Department of Labor and some federal studies. If you have no idea what your NAIC code is, you can just do a quick Google search and say, if I'm a landscaping company, what is my NAIC code? bam, you can see 561730. So those are some of the key things you need to have a tax ID number, and you'll get something similar, a couple page document here through your state, and you'll have a state tax ID number. So you got those two things, and you got the articles of incorporation from LegalZoom. If you need to take a break, sometimes there's a couple hours right there. Feel free to take a break. But on day 2, let's say, then we can start to take a look at some of the technology tools that you might need. And so let's go ahead and dive into that as well. So since you got the business name and tax identification number, if you want to start a website, you have to have the domain name. So for Petros Family Tax, for example, petrosfamilytax.com, go to GoDaddy, type it in, type whatever domain that you want to have. Pay for it, it's usually $20, $30 a year with a discount for that first year. Once you have that, then you can start looking at website providers, and GoDaddy has a website provider. We use Wix. One of those low-cost options that you don't need to be a website designer in order to design a website. So then once you have that website, then you can go take a look at the email side of things. Because let's say it's petrosfamilytax.com, then you can go into try to get an email address with that domain. So John Doe at petrosfamilytax.com as an example, and Google is usually a good starting point. Because they have a bunch of email and Google Docs and a couple of other things that might be helpful for your startup business. So after you got the operating documents, tax ID number for federal and state, website and all that jazz, next step is to get a checking account and a business credit card, likely. If you're having difficulty getting a new business card or a new checking account, you can actually just open up a separate checking account and credit card in your personal name, because again, you're filing taxes as a sole proprietor, so it doesn't necessarily matter too much as far as the taxation goes. But ideally, if you could have a business checking and a business credit card separately, that'll be helpful for some tracking of expenses later on. And then at this point, typically if your revenue is zero and you don't expect that revenue to come in right away, a lot of times it's just most helpful to have, if you use Chase for your other credit cards, it's probably fruitful just to have a business Chase credit card. Again, the number one way you make money is not through credit card rewards or through tax savings. Number one way you make money is selling your services. So that's the most important part. And just try to make everything else easy. You can have the same business checking account with your same provider or same bank as your personal checking account, as an example. So once you get those two things, then what you can do is, the last few steps here is to set up bookkeeping. And there's two big players here in the US. One is QuickBooks and the other one is Xero. Xero is Xero. QuickBooks covers about 70% of small businesses, and so probably best to go with that platform because there's a lot more resources and training available. And as you scale and grow, a lot more accountants are more familiar with QuickBooks than they are with some of the other providers out there. And so I just pulled up QuickBooks as an example, and for pretty low cost here, those startup costs are pretty minimal. And then through QuickBooks, what that'll do is you'll tie in your business checking and your business credit card, and it'll start tracking some of the transactions that you have in there. And typically in that third or fourth month is probably the time where you need to really get comfortable and familiar with QuickBooks. Because if you have bad accounting, it's going to make your taxes kind of ridiculous to figure out. And as far as QuickBooks, it's very easy, especially if you're using that invoicing, to potentially double book some of your revenue. So if you're invoicing somebody, it's very easy for to accidentally count that as income, and then once they actually pay the invoice, showing that as income as well. I would recommend seeking some assistance and just some initial training, either online. Otherwise, there's some very low-cost options. If there's very low-cost bookkeepers out there that for 1 or 2 training sessions, it's anywhere between $300 and $1,000, and it is well worth it to get that training because it's very hard and very expensive a year or 2 into it to clean up your books. So do that small investment right up front, maybe at the 3 month mark, So that way you have some transactions to kind of play around with. Don't let it go on, to 12 months or especially into like the next calendar year, for example. The last thing we're going to cover here is if you have employees, I would not recommend doing QuickBooks Payroll. Instead, I would recommend doing Gusto. This one's a lot easier to use, a lot simpler to use. You probably don't need to have payroll for yourself unless you're filing as an S Corp. And there's another video about that from our sister company, Petros Family Wealth. You can take a look at that. Generally, you need about $70,000 a year in net profits before it makes sense to go into the S Corp and start paying yourself a salary. That's usually the break-even point between the added expenses of tax filing and payroll. That tax savings starts to be more than the added expenses of administering an S Corp versus being an LLC and filing as a sole proprietor. So until you get that smoother cash flow, you probably don't need this unless you're starting to hire some folks. Then Gusto can provide that for you, and it's a great simple tool to set up some automatic and recurring payroll, either hourly or salary, depending on the type of employees that you have. So that'll probably be enough to kind of get you started here for the first couple months and first possibly year here of your business. And as you grow and expand, then you'll take a look at bookkeeping, having a bookkeeper to take that on for you, so you can focus more on the business and the revenue side of things. That $70,000 a year of profit is typically where it starts to make sense to start factoring or taking a look at possibly filing as an S Corp. So hope you found that helpful, and if you did, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button. Thank you so much.